Welcome, everyone. I'm Tom Del Beccaro, and that's Steve Hook. And welcome to the inaugural broadcast of our podcast, which we call Enlightened Dissent. Del Beccaro and Hook's Enlightened Dissent. And we're so happy to have you here today. We have a great special guest for you in just a little bit. In the meantime, we'd like to introduce ourselves and why we want to do this sort of thing. There's a million podcasts out there, but not every one of them has the legendary Steve Hook or even has me as part of that podcast. So let's get started. Our format is basically we're going to do what we call in the first segment, the opening volley. We're going to introduce a topic. Steve and I will go back and forth about it. We'll then have our special guests, and then we'll make our closing arguments for the day. We'll be out each Sunday night with a broadcast going all the way through the election and far beyond. So we welcome you. Thank you for tuning in. And let's get started. First, a little bit about Steve Hook from the man himself.
Well, thank you, Tom. And what a thrill, man. Our very first one. And it's going to be a good one too. I'm really kind of jazzed about it. My name, as Tom mentioned, is Steve Hook. I've been in radio for, goodness gracious, longer than most mental health care providers would recommend, over 40 years now. I've done the political thing for about 12 to 13 years. I got my start with the late, great Bob Grant. Everybody might remember Bob Grant, legendary talk show host, pretty much invented the format of political talk. And I was his regular fill-in host for his show Straight Ahead with Bob Grant, which was kind of a short-lived internet thing, Tom. That's because Bob, he died shortly thereafter, I hate to say. But Bob and I had become really good friends, and that led to my own show, Right Hook Radio, and then I worked for TNT out of Australia. Done a lot of podcasting and whatnot over the years, and it's just a real thrill to be here with the brand new venture with Enlightened Dissent with my friend Tom Del Beccaro. Tom, that's my story, brother. What's yours?
Well, I started getting into politics at a very early age. Met Richard Nixon at 7 years old. My father was helped start the Conservative Party of New York way back in the day. Elected James Buckley. He started me reading The Economist and Foreign Policy magazine as a 10-year-old, history books as a teenager, and especially Will and Ariel Durant. And so my career, in addition to starting there, I, of course, was former chairman of the California Republican Party. I ran for U.S. Senate against a little-known figure, Kamala Harris, who apparently has gone farther than me. At least that's what I'm guessing. And beyond that, I came out with a couple of history books, which I think are pretty darn good and relevant. One is called The Divided Era, which explains that the more government decides, the more it divides. And my most recent effort is called The Lessons of the American Civilization, which certainly has some lessons for our current times, to be sure. Steve, why don't you tell people just a little bit about your point of view? How do you come to politics?
Well, I'll tell you, there is a absolute moment where the worm turned for me, and I can give it to you. I was a registered Democrat for many years, damn near 30 years. And it was in 1996 when I saw what was going on with the Lewinsky affair with Bill Clinton. And then I saw the Democratic Party immediately circle the wagons around Bill and turn their guns on every woman that came forward. And right then and there, I said, these guys are not what they claim to be. This is straight up rank hypocrisy. And frankly, it's bullying of these women. I remember SNL doing skits on Linda Tripp. You may recall that. Funny skit with John Goodman. But none of that crap sat well with me. And frankly, I was already starting to, as an adult, having kids and stuff, you start realizing maybe I should have paid a little bit more attention to politics. And now that I have, I tell you, Tom, I wouldn't vote Democrat, maybe in a local election if it was somebody I knew. But I voted Democrat straight party ticket for year on end, and I will never do that again, ever, ever, ever. And my conservatism has only grown since '96, so that's kind of where it began for me. How about you? Obviously young.
Yeah, no question about it. And my viewpoint has really been shaped by the many decades I've spent reading history books and now writing history books. In that process, my particular brand of history books is always to put things in political context or historical context. We are pretty much the same human race, maybe with more wealth and more things that are we're eligible to use now because we're a much richer society, and we can take hot showers. Maybe they didn't do that, right, 150 years ago, that kind of thing. But we're still basically the same human beings as thousands of years ago. We respond to incentives and stimuli in almost the same fashion. And so what I try and do, and it's called, what I write is called historical philosophy, which is to take the moment and put it in light of the whole. That's what the great historical philosopher Will Durant would say. And so I always try and place things in context. And once you read enough history, I think you develop a healthy skepticism of those in favor of big centralized government. So my animus, where I'm coming from, is if we know that it ends up bad with big centralized government, maybe we should stop running headlong into that particular direction. And folks, that's where we're coming from. But let's talk a little bit about that format and the opening volley, as we said, which we're just about to begin. Then we'll have our special guests and our closing argument. So I'm going to start with my opening volley. As you know, this is coming right after the DNC convention and the surprise, or maybe not, of RFK Jr. endorsing Donald Trump. So my opening volley is that the Democrats got pretty much what they wanted out of the last convention. They're happy with where they are until RFK stole the limelight a little bit. So let me explain why I think they're happy where they are. If they hadn't switched candidates, think about this, that convention could have been closer to a wake than the excitement that they showed inside. They were very down on their luck with respect to Bill Clinton, their own fault, mind you. They chose not to do a primary process that would have brought a new candidate to the fore. They chose to crack down on others who dissented from saying that he wasn't still up to the job. But they switched. Kamala Harris has been there a month. They're much more excited than they would have been. There's been a reshuffling of the deck. Yes, the media on the left, which has become the PR outlet for Kamala Harris, is exaggerating her abilities. I mean, think about it. The first half of the year, they said, for Washington Post said, for the country, she should step aside. Now she's the second coming. And so, nevertheless, they went through this convention. They're unified, at least within that convention hall. The media is unified again. They're not arguing about whether Joe Biden should step aside. They still have problems. The whole Israeli-Gaza war definitely divides them. So too, how far left they should go. But they're happy with where they are in this election cycle. So what's next is the question for them. Steve, what's your view?
Well, very similar to yours, actually, Tom. Obvious, and I love the line. It would have been a wake had Biden been there. That's an absolute fact. It would have been a wake. Everybody knew it. But Tom, you'd like to put things when you kind of line it up with history, and I like to take a look at that historical context too, and that makes it difficult this time around because there is no historical context for what the Democrats have done this time around. They've never done this. Remember this: Joe Biden got damn near 14 million votes in the primary process, such as it was. It's important that we remember that during that primary process, RFK Jr. was being sued at every turn to keep him off of state ballots. There was all kinds of nastiness and kneecapping going on behind the scenes that MSNBC and CNN and God knows the New York Times and Washington Post editorial boards will never talk about. But RFK Jr. was treated much like Bernie Sanders was in 2016. And even that kind of flew under the radar. So now, after Biden gets his 14 million votes, He's sitting on a beach furious somewhere, and Kamala Harris is luxuriating in this brand new adulation that's coming from the same people that 4 months ago were begging Joe Biden to dump her. I just am so another. There is no historical context. I don't know where we go from here. I suspect that she will, typically you get a convention bounce. She might get a bit of a convention bounce. Apparently, that's already starting to show up a little bit in the polls. The question, though, Tom, is how long does this bounce last, especially with RFK, Kennedy, for God's sakes? I wonder if he'll ever be invited back to Kenny Bunkport from his family now that he's endorsed Trump. Who would have thunk it? What's your thought on all of that?
Yeah, they should definitely do a Kardashian version of the Kennedys at Thanksgiving and see how that all works out for them. Look, I think the Kennedy endorsement can be a big thing, but not necessarily will be. And it all comes down to what he does from here. Because his speech the other day, I think, is must listening for anyone who wants to understand the real dynamics going around with respect to the media and the Democrat Party. It's an
Yeah.
absolute fact that he was sued to keep him off the ballot because the so-called saviors of democracy do not actually want that. Throughout all of history, those claiming to want to save democracy, the stability of the republic, has usually been authoritarians who wanted to prevent others from taking away their seat of power. And that's no different than what today. I actually talk extensively in my book, The Lessons of the American Civilization, about that dynamic. And so the Democrats saw him as a threat. They saw him as a threat to not to grow their party through open discussion, but they wanted to stop him from using money that they would have to return by using money in a campaign fight. So they kept him off the ballot and forced him out of the party. They also have been suing Jill Stein, the Green Party leader who runs consistently, suing her wherever she's trying to get on the ballot in an effort to not siphon away votes. That's their definition of democracy. But where this could really work or help Trump, this particular endorsement, is if RFK hits the trail in important states, and he's already said he's going to come off the ballot in the battleground states. He'll stay on the ballot in the deep blue, like my California, or Jersey and New York, where you hail from currently. He'll come off the ballot in the battleground, but stay on those states. If he goes to those battleground states and talks to independent voters and says, look, this is not my great uncle's party. This is a party that is interested in the consolidation of power and is anti-democratic. If he goes around the country, or especially those battleground states, and makes that argument clear, then I think what you're going to find is that he will make a significant difference and bring votes to.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that, the general consensus is that RFK Jr. brought about 5% of the vote. If you just kind of cumulatively around the country, maybe 5%, call it 4 to 5%. If Trump can peel off 3% of those in these key battleground states, it's a game over. I mean, if he can get 3% of RFK Jr. Support in Georgia, he wins Georgia. If he can get 3 to 4% in Pennsylvania, and that's going to be a tough road to hoe because you got Philly and you got Pittsburgh, which is pretty much blue, blue, blue. But the rest of Pennsylvania, I can tell you, living near it, it's very much Trump country. So if RFK can help him peel off a percentage point or two there, he can win Pennsylvania. And I really do love the fact that he is, and this is, talk about a sharp stick in the eye to the DNC. He's saying, I am not going to pull out of these states that are obviously blue states. I mean, that's Tom, how's that for just like, GFY, if you know what I'm saying. But that's what RFK is saying to the DNC, GFY. And it really is, I don't blame him. I would be furious if I were him for what they did to him, starting with not giving him any kind of Secret Service detail, given the fact that his uncle and his father were both assassinated. That just seemed to be politically inept from the Biden campaign, which might explain why it's the Kamala Harris campaign now. I don't know.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's just shift the focus slightly here with her strategy of not talking to anyone. And so let's put this in context. Barack Obama wasn't very specific when he ran either. Joe Biden ran from his basement and, in a sense, stayed away from the press. And now she's doing the same, and she's so far given precious few details. This has worked for them. It worked with them with Obama. It worked with them with Biden. The campaign was carried by surrogates and or CNN and MSNBC that drove out their base who watches those shows. And now they're trying it again with Kamala. Now, look, I ran against Kamala. I debated Kamala. She's not good when she has to think on her feet. We saw that. You see those in all those word salads. So it's not surprising to me that they're hiding her away, if you will, keeping her away from a lot of questions, because just one or two word salads will really hurt. It's really going to be up to Trump to get on that debate stage. I don't care where it occurs. It could occur on ABC or a stage in Illinois between Lincoln and Douglas. Anytime he gets her on a stage, and this is what he needs to do, in my view. And I ran against her and I won the debate poll. So here's what you do. You simply say, here's the problems that their administration caused, the open border. Here's why that was bad. I'm going to close it down by doing 1, 2, 3, and that'll be better for all Americans. Now let's talk about inflation. He just needs to be Mr. Fix-It. Then during the debate, he should occasionally gesture his hands towards her, not look at her, but just gesture his hand and say, maybe she can explain the difference between her and Joe Biden, or why she flip-flopped on fracking, or do you really believe, and then insert whatever it is. They need to get her speaking it extemporaneously, so he has to agree to as many debates as he can get her to agree.
Yeah, and but therein lies the rub, because I don't think she's going to do another debate, save the ABC debate. I think she'll do that one and say, well, you know what? That's it. Well, you got me, and that's all you're going to get. She has been dodging, ducking, and weaving. This is basement campaign 2.0, but this time with Kamala at the head of the ticket. You know, goodness gracious, we could do 3 hours on what do you think of Tim Walz. I mean, the nerve of that guy calling anybody weird is just beyond my ability to quite wrap my head around. But anyway, Tom, well, there you go. So that's where we're at. I can't wait to talk with our special guest about this. You want to kind of tease that out a little bit, Tom?
Well, the special guest is someone who I want to be the next governor of California, and let's leave it at that. Thank you for listening so far, and let's go to the break. Welcome back, everyone. I'm excited. We have our special guest. You can see him on the screen right there so easily. My friend Steve Hilton, the dynamic Steve Hilton. Steve, how you doing today?
Very good. Feeling very dynamic. It's extra dynamic for you, Tom. Great to be here.
There you go. For those of you who don't know Steve Hilton, the 2 or 3 of you out there, he served as the senior advisor to former United Kingdom Prime Minister David Cameron. He's the author of the UK Sunday Times bestseller, More Human, Designing a World Where People Come First. Of course, many of you know him when he joined Fox in 2016 and hosted The Next Revolution. And his current project is something called Golden Together, which I'm a big supporter of. And that entity develops and advocates for positive, emphasis positive, and practical, also the emphasis there, policy ideas to help solve California problems. So Steve, thanks so much for coming on the inaugural broadcast of Enlightened Dissent with Del Beccaro and Hook. And if you could could you just start out right there and tell people a little bit about Better Together?
Golden Together. Yeah, it's a real joy for me actually to be doing. Am I allowed to say the word joy these days, or is that completely owned by Kamala Harris and her crew over there at the Democratic Party? I feel very, very excited about what we're working on because, you know, I've been here in California now for 12 years, just 12 and a half years. We moved here in 2012 from England with our family. And as you mentioned, recently, in recent years, I've been on television and elsewhere and talking about things, including how badly things are going off the rails here in California. As you know, and I'll make sure our audience knows, I'm a proud American now. I got my citizenship 3.5 years ago, something like that. But I'm also a proud Californian. I love this state so much. We're raising our family here. I've had so many incredible opportunities here. I got to teach at Stanford University. The first couple of years we were here, I started a tech company. I had this media career. Amazing. We love California, but it's just so obvious it's going off the rails. And so the whole point of Golden Together for me was a way to sort of, in a way, get back to what I used to do before in terms of policy and government and developing ideas and then figuring out ways to actually make them happen, to actually stop just talking about these problems that we have in California and complaining about the whole time on television, and actually trying to develop solutions. So that's what we're doing at Golden Together. We're touching on all the big issues. We publish a report roughly once a month. Our latest one was on water, which is a huge issue here in California, particularly for our great agriculture industry. There's no reason why we shouldn't have abundant water in California. We've got a plan to make it happen. We talk about how we've got a policy report on housing and our housing crisis, on the business climate. There's so many things that we're working on. It's fantastic. I'm really enjoying it, and especially the part of it which takes me around the state to meet people in all walks of life, and especially business people who are really struggling under the burdens that have been placed on them by government in California. Small businesses, amazing, innovative companies, they're all struggling, and we got to do something about it. So that's the plan here at Golden Together.
And where can they find that on the web?
Yeah, very, very simple, goldentogether.com, or one word, goldentogether.com. And there's a section at the top on the menu called policy. And if you sort of do the drop down menu there, you can see our different reports, download them all. There's a simple summary at the beginning for people like you, Tom, who I know you don't like reading very much. So there's a few bullet points at the beginning. You can get all the information there. You like writing, but it reminds me of there's this famous saying from Noel Coward. Some of the audience may have heard of Noel Coward, a great wit in 20th century England. And in the early days of television, he was asked if he ever watches TV. And he said, "My dear, television is for appearing on, not watching." So in the same way, Tom, you know, for you, books are for writing, not reading, I'm guessing.
Oh,
I'm gonna steal that one. All right, listen, folks, there's a reason why I wanted to kick this off with Steve Hilton. As you know, or maybe Americans don't know, English politics is intense as well, and it's not always easy just to get elected. It's not a one party state where you just rush in. You have to be really thoughtful. And certainly during your era, while you were a strategist, you had to be so thoughtful. And now he's finding himself in California, which is a difficult state in its own right, but also on the national stage. Obviously, this is going to be a close election. I wrote a book called The Divided Era. So, Steve, I've been dying to ask you, because of your background, what is your take on the race today, and what do you think Trump needs to do going forward?
I mean, we're taping this on August the 24th. People may listen to it at different times. It's the Saturday after the Democratic convention. You know, a lot of agreement that the convention went smoothly. It went well from the Democrats' point of view. Of course, that's not difficult when you have the media completely fawning all over you and helping everything to go well. But there you are. Again, there's another English saying that I think is very important to bear in mind. I can't remember exactly who said this one, but the saying is this: for a politician to complain about the media is like a sailor complaining about the sea. And I kind of think that's true for Republicans. Of course, it's true that the media are terrible and biased and whatever. We get it, right? It's our job to navigate that. I think that but just the reason I mentioned the date is because it also comes a day after the very significant endorsement of Trump by RFK Jr. in a rather amazing event, I have to say. I mean, I wasn't able to, I was on the road and I didn't see any of the coverage of it live, but as I've been watching the speeches that were made at that event where Kennedy appeared on stage with Trump, rather amazing and very interesting, conversation between them about policy, in particular, an area of policy that's been a huge focus for me, which is how we, in the whole area of healthcare, and we spend all our time talking about healthcare systems and bureaucracies and payments and all the rest of it, but far too little time talking about, well, why are we so sick in the first place? And how can we do things to help us become more healthy? That's a big part of my book, More Human. So it's very interesting, which was 2015, I wrote that book. So it's very interesting to me that Trump and Kennedy were talking about chronic disease and so on. And I think, and a lot of people may dismiss that and say, well, that's just this kind of, narrow niche interest and who cares about that? I think they're just completely wrong to dismiss it. And I think it could be very powerful. And then you look at the electoral effect. Again, people dismiss the Kennedy endorsement because they say, well, he doesn't have, his support collapsed after Biden was kicked out of the race. The idea being that really the Kennedy levels of support, where you saw him getting, 15% or so in the national polls, was all because it was disaffected Democrats who didn't want to vote for Biden. Now his support's around 5% in the latest polls, but that could make a huge difference in the swing states where things are very close. And that really is the point I think we should emphasize. It's a very close election, very close.
Yeah.
And you've got a situation where right now, I mean, again, I think there's that phrase, I can't remember who coined this phrase. It was about the financial markets. There's an irrational exuberance about the Kamala Harris campaign. It seems to me that they think they've got it in the bag. That was the vibe you got out of Chicago. I don't think that's true at all. It's a very, very close election. Remember that Trump now in his position in the polls, which is either neck and neck or slightly behind Kamala Harris at the national level, similar picture in the swing states, that is a much better political position than he's ever had in an election. It's further ahead than he was against Hillary Clinton in 2016, and further ahead, much further ahead than he was relative to Biden in 2020. And what we've seen with Trump in every single election where he's been on the ballot is that consistently his polling position understates his actual support when all the ballots are counted. And so right now, you would have to say that, and again, this is not the narrative you get from most in the media. I think he would be slightly favored because it's very close, and if the same position holds true as before, that means he's actually a little bit ahead. But of course, we have at least a month to go till people start voting, 2 months or so till election day, more. But we've got some big things happening. We got the debate on September the 10th. That's going to be crucial. And then we've got the ability of the Trump campaign to really focus on the area of opportunity for them, which is policy, because that is their strength and Kamala Harris's weakness. And policy comes down to two things. It's actually a demonstration of, what you would do to make people's lives better. And of course, Trump, when they make the policy argument, they can point to what they did before, which is still seen as a far better record than the recent record of Harris and Biden. And then the other aspect of it is to draw out the negative consequences for people of the Harris agenda, which are very obvious. I mean, you just see a headline just yesterday in the New York Times, almost without comment. You can just put the headline out there. What do we know about Kamala Harris's $5 trillion plan to raise taxes? 5 trillion. It's astonishing. It's just straight up there in the New York Times headline. I mean, really, there's a lot of material to go to town on, both positively and negatively. And again, what we've seen from Kamala Harris in the past, and you saw a glimpse of it in her first policy intervention, her only one so far, her economic speech just before the convention, that's where she really falls apart. She's not strong on policy. She really doesn't have a kind of strong grip of that. And you saw that in the way that announcement just fell apart. You know, the suggestion that she's going to do price controls is the answer to inflation. And then ever since then, they've been kind of backing off that and trying to say, well, that's not really what she meant, and so on. You know, your first big policy speech, and it is panned by even allies like the Washington Post, and you spend the next week running away from it. So that's a vulnerability for her, and it's a strength for Trump. And I think that's where the opportunity lies.
Steve, let me ask you this, because as we talk about this, I mean, obviously the price control landed with a thud, and everybody, I mean, even the CNN panel shows were all like going, well, what is this, just a gimmick? And the answer is yes, it's just a gimmick. I thought the convention was filled with platitudes and cliches. Obviously, somebody trained her on delivery. I didn't hear her really cackle once during her acceptance speech. I thought the acceptance speech was funny. She says, I'm here for the people when not one single person has voted for her. But there you go. That's what it is. And she is going to get the Gunga Din water carriers in the media. You mentioned policy, and policy is everything in this. Trump, I think, seems to be a little bit more disciplined this time around when he addresses policy concerns, and he's got to get off the negative attacks, because I think that'll turn off some female voters. But now that we know that the price control argument's not going to work for her, you look at some of the internal polls, the border, crime, all of this. Doesn't the campaign really start now? And do you think that
Yeah.
the high water mark for Kamala Harris may have ended on
Yes.
Thursday night?
No. I think that's exactly right. I mean, that's what you would expect. So, in the way that there's a lag about these things, you should expect the polling position to get better over the next few days and into Labor Day weekend. But once we're back from Labor Day weekend, yeah, then it's on. Very little time. I mean, you've got a week till the debate on September the 10th, and then another week or so still until, well, it's days actually, till they start voting, unbelievably, because we have this insane new, election season voting rather than election day. So in Pennsylvania, I believe it's a couple of days after the first debate. Plus, you have the Trump sentencing, which is in there as well. That's, I think, on the 18th. I mean, it's just that there's a lot happening soon. Just a thought on the convention. I mean, I completely agree, and to me, the whole thing was so unbelievably dishonest. I mean, even for them, and even for someone like her, who's just, I mean, the central thing to understand about Kamala Harris, I think, and I've said this about, and she's, in one sense, she's exactly like Biden. And if you watch her career, you can see this. She's a classic example of a machine politician. She does not have any kind of core beliefs that drive her. That's why you didn't really see any of that in her speech, and it was all a bunch of platitude. There's nothing really there other than to do whatever is politically expedient. That's why it's so simple for her to say, yeah, all those things I said about defunding the police and banning fracking and Medicare for all and abolishing private health insurance and on, all the list of far left positions that she's taken not that long ago. This is not like when she was in her 20s. This is just the last time she ran for president. And she's just saying, yeah, actually, all inoperative, just delete them, doesn't apply anymore. And so she'll say whatever it takes. And that's why, within the space of a few years, she was branding herself as, cop Kamala and the tough prosecutor. And then she was on about defunding the police and reimagining criminal justice and bailing out rioters. So that's the central weakness. And by the way, I just want to make an argument about why that matters for voters. In my experience of working in politics and in government over the years, the truth is that in an election, of course, you lay out all your plans. You say, this is what I'm going to do, and vote for me, and this will happen. But actually, in particular, at the national level, and certainly at this presidential level, when you're the president of the United States, what really determines the outcome of your presidency, what really, most of the time that you spend when you're in that position, it's not actually implementing the plans that you've laid out. It's responding to unpredictable future events, things that no one knows what's going to happen. And so actually your character is incredibly important. And if you're someone like Biden or like Kamala Harris, who doesn't have that firm set of convictions and beliefs about what you want to do, then your response to unpredictable future events is going to be all over the place and weak. And that's what's so dangerous. And you saw that with Biden. You saw it in relation to international affairs, most particularly. I mean, just recently with Israel. So when October the 7th happens, he gives a strong response rhetorically. He goes to Israel, great. But as soon as there's political pressure, as soon as there's a sense that this is not helping him politically, he abandons Israel, runs away from his positions. Because of that, prolongs the war, exacerbates the chaos in the Middle East. That's what happens when you have someone who doesn't have strong convictions and will just say whatever it takes, whatever's politically expedient at the time. And that's the danger with Kamala Harris.
So, Stephen, a couple of minutes we have remaining. In years past, there's always, I remember there was soccer moms, there changing of the Latino vote, that type of thing. One dynamic I find very interesting is the changing in Silicon Valley, Elon Musk and others. Could you just give us in the next 2 minutes, what's your thought about that? And does it have staying power?
Yeah, I think so, because you've got I think what's broken is the sense that you can, there's such a big social cost and reputational cost to actually expressing what you really believe. So for a long time, actually, you've had this. I've noticed this when you speak to tech leaders who are absolutely over the years who've been very, very strong Democrats, publicly and privately, and they've hosted fundraisers for Obama and Hillary Clinton, many of the people, my neighbors, people I actually know, and they are, yeah, I'm a Democrat. But then you talk to them about what they think about issues, and it turns out that they are that classic combination that you hear about a lot, which is, yes, on some social policy issues, they're very much in line with the Democratic position on issues like abortion and marriage equality, and to a certain extent climate change. But when you talk to them about economic policy, they're very, very conservative in their views, or education policy, or anything that you could put in the category of, I suppose, more directly affecting their businesses. And so that's always been there. And I think what you're seeing now, particularly where you have this reorientation of the Republican Party with Donald Trump, who himself has been more liberal, if you like, on some of those social issues. And you see how he's handled abortion. And people forget it was the first US president elected publicly in support of marriage equality. Donald Trump was the first one. And so actually that has created a permission structure, I think, for some of these business leaders in the tech world to in a way, you could say, carrying on the analogy, to come out and say, well, actually, these are the policies that make more sense to me. And then the further thing that's really driven this, I think, given a very strong part of the Silicon Valley belief system is about freedom of expression and information being free, and of course that's the foundation of the tech industry in many ways. Information that is put out there for the world. And so the rising tide of authoritarianism that you've seen from the left, in particular the censorship, I mean, that is, and then of course that came to its head during the pandemic. I think all of that has really combined to say to people, I've had enough. And one last thing I'd say, yes, of course you have Elon and they're the big names that we talk about, others like David Sachs hosting events for Trump. But actually on the lower level, one thing that I really noticed was that in the wake of the Trump assassination attempt, there was a huge outpouring of support from people working in tech. I saw this on social media and so on. People and it was just really striking. It's like, that's it. I'm done. I'm not. I don't care what it costs me reputationally, economically. This guy, he's a leader and he needs our support, and we're going to support him. So I think that was a big factor as well.
Yeah. I mean, even Zuckerberg came out and said that was the most badass thing I ever saw, when Trump stood up and put his fist in the air and said, fight, fight, fight. Who would you have thought, Stephen? I know you've got a split, and we thank you for your time. But before you go, would you have ever, in your wildest dreams, have imagined that a Kennedy would be endorsing Trump, and that Elon Musk and Kennedy may, some way, maybe it'll be a czar position or something, may end up in the cabinet of Donald Trump should he win and be number 47? What do you think the betting line on that was? Kennedy endorsing, and Elon Musk endorsing.
Well, I'm not surprised. The thing is that I've known Donald Trump for a long time, actually. because, I first met him and interviewed him in, when was it, 2018. But I've, observed him. And the thing that, and that's what's interesting. He's not an ideologue. He's not an ideologue. Like, let's put it that way. And therefore, he's open to different ways of looking at the world. He's very pragmatic. He is very pragmatic. Now, the critics would, like shudder at that kind of description. They say, "Oh, he's just a monster, and he's this and that." And well, to me, he's absolutely not that. He's not an ideologue. He's very pragmatic. He's very businesslike. It's like, okay, how do I get this done? And I think one of the things that really went wrong in the first Trump presidency, and in a way, and I've said this before, drives, still does, and certainly drove then a lot of the behavior that when you hear people say, well, I support Trump's policies, but I don't like the way he behaves. I think a lot of the behavior was driven by the fact that he believed, as an outsider to politics and a business guy, that you run for election and here's what I'm going to do. And then you get there and you do it. And to his sort of absolute amazement, I think genuine amazement, he gets there, and instead of all the people around him helping him to do what he said he would do, they're all trying to stop him. I mean, literally all the people in Congress, the people in his team, the people in the White House, the media, of course, everyone is trying to stop him. And he's sitting there thinking, hang on a second, this is all like really clear. I said I'd do this. Why can't I do this? And so I feel like that pragmatism and that just that get things done mentality is exactly what you see in someone like Elon Musk. And also the kind of heterodox thinking where, you have, Bobby Kennedy, yes, he's a Democrat and has certain positions on issues like climate change or whatever that are very much, you could say, traditionally on the left, but on other issues, very conservative. And so I think that, they fit together very well. That combination of non-ideological problem-solving thinking and a kind of get things done kind of mindset. And actually the big difference with Trump, and that's why I think people would be very excited about a second Trump administration, he's completely learned the lesson of that, the phenomenon I was describing earlier, and it's absolutely clear about the fact that he's going to have all this institutional opposition, and so this time would go in there forewarned and forearmed and ready to really make things happen.
You're here.
Hey, Steve, thanks so very much for joining us again. Tell people where they can find you and your good work.
Thank you so much. It's very simple. It's at Steve Hilton X. So the X was before Elon Musk rebranded it as Twitter as X. That was in mind. It's just because Steve Hilton was taken. So I just put an X. I don't know why I did that. So at Steve Hilton X, I'm very active on X. And then from there, I link to everything else. So the other thing I'll mention is the Steve Hilton Show, weekly podcast, where we cover the national issues and some California issues as well. So check that out on Apple and Spotify and all the usual places, the Steve Hilton Show.
Folks, you definitely should follow Steve. He's not just a thinker. And if you read what he's doing, he's clearly a thinker, but he's also a doer. And that's what we need in this country. The person that will actually help get the work done instead of just being a critic. Steve, I thank you so much for joining us.
Great pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Inaugural effort. And we'll be right back after this word from our sponsors, which happens to be me in this case.
Okay, welcome back to Enlightened Dissent with me, Steve Hook, and my friend Tom Del Beccaro. Remember, Tom's brand new book, Lessons from the American Civilization, is out now. It's a great book. By the way, so is The Divided Era, which is another book. I think the first time you and I met, Tom, you were pushing that book on my old show, Right Hook Radio, but that's a great book, and this one is as well. I think, Tom, the bottom line here from the convention and the RFK, the Kennedy, bailing out and handing his support over to Trump. I think the bottom line is now it comes down. Now we've got a campaign. Now we really do. Now no more of the of the smoke and mirrors. Now we get down to brass tacks. I think the Trump campaign and Donald Trump, I think he's been much more disciplined this time than he was in 2020 and 2016 as far as his messaging goes. But he's still got that Trumpian vibe to him. But I do think that he needs to really press her on the fact that she was the one that broke the tie in the Senate for the Inflation Redistribution Act. They call it the Inflation Reduction Act. It was basically just wealth redistribution on steroids. She broke that tie in the Senate. Really, the only proactive thing I think she ever did while she was in the VP slot, and it wasn't a good thing. It was a bad thing. So I think Trump needs to press her on that. And also, remember how she bragged so much about the fact that, hey, I was the last one in the room when we signed off to bag out of Abbey Gate and Afghanistan. He needs to really press her on that, and we need to remind the American people of just how disastrous she is. This whole plan of trying to distance herself from the administration that she's currently sitting in. I mean, I know the media is going to carry that water, but I mean, surely, Tom, people have more common sense than that. Surely they can see that, wait a minute, she's sitting at the right hand of this fella that did all this, and she's kind of bragging about it. And now she's seemingly forgotten all about that. What do you think?
Well, my closing argument is this. So far, it's working for them. And so that means the Republicans, if they want to win, would have to change their tactics to upset their apple cart. Think about it. She's gotten away with not talking to the press for 5 weeks now. She promised to do something by the end of the month. I'm not betting that she is going to do very much by the end of the month. And I'm sure the first interview that she gives, the very first one, will be a puff piece with George Stephanopoulos or some similar character.
Dana Bash.
There you go. So the question becomes, what will Republicans do to upset this apple cart? And they need to pull some pages out of the playbook that are right there in front of everyone. If Donald Trump and the Republicans want to win this election, they have to do a couple of things in my view. Number one, the very successful John Kerry flip-flop ads from the past where he was on a sailboard, they need to bring those back. And what they need to do is just simply the 8 or 10 issues on which she's changed her mind or she's evolved. It's okay to evolve on 1 or 2. I get it. That's possible, but not from 3 months ago, right? And so what they need to do is run these flip-flop ads in Pennsylvania and all the battleground states so that those voters understand, and they need to saturate this. That's number one. And number two, you saw a huge rally with RFK. I think it was like 17,000 inside the building. Those huge rallies are great, but Trump needs to have very targeted messages that he approves. And that's going back to what I said about him being Mr. Fix-It, because at the end of the day, their voters, it's always about the future elections, right? And especially for independents. In history, independents become independent for a couple of reasons. One, they don't want to get robocalls. That's a serious comment. Two, they don't like the fighting between the parties, right? And three, they're just growing tired of politics altogether because they don't see it actually resulting in anything good. So knowing that, and that's been true a long time, and keep in mind, the independents are about a third in any one given cycle. A third are liberal, a third are conservative, and a third are genuinely in the middle. Trump needs to reach them on a very easygoing, simple Mr. Fix-It level. This is what I'm going to concentrate. Here is how it's going to help you. That type of thing. If he does that, then he sets himself well up for the debates, because if those flip-flop ads are showing prior to the debate, then that becomes the question that must be asked. And if she can't answer it in the debate as to why she changed on all these issues, then that maximizes what needs to occur or maximizes her weakness. And that's where Trump can gain ground. So again, my point in this segment and this closing argument with respect to this campaign is right now, she's getting her way. She could get her way the rest of the way unless Republicans change the game, and they change the game by trying different tactics at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. She's got to, what they need to do is, to borrow a phrase, Tom, what the DNC is doing right now is reimagining campaigning. I mean, remember, that's what they wanted to do with the police. We're going to reimagine a police security and all this. Well, they're reimagining campaigning. I think they saw what Biden did. The media, of course, being the Gunga Dins of the DNC, carried the water right on through to an electoral victory. I don't know that that's going to happen this time around. I think that there's more cynicism in the air than there's ever been. And I fully agree with you in your closing argument. Trump needs to stay on message. Trump needs to be the positive, I'm going to fix it candidate. And should that happen, especially if RFK Jr. is going around to all these key battleground states, I think it's going to be huge. We didn't even discuss Elon Musk and his possible role in the next Trump administration. But you know what? That actually might even bring some more votes to Trump. Just getting Elon in the mix. It's going to be interesting, man. And I can't wait to go through all of this with you as we get closer and closer to Election Day. And damn, it's coming up. And in some states, it's going to be here within a couple of weeks, the early voting. That's one more thing I should have added to my closing argument, and that is Republicans need to do the early voting. They really, really need to work on the vote harvesting and getting out there, because the DNC is way in front of the game on that end. So we'll see how it plays out, Tom.
Yeah, let me pick up there, because in my prior life, I was chairman of the California Republican Party, and a lot of Republicans were troubled by the vote harvesting of the Democrats. I need to remind them, in the olden days, 25 years ago, it was Republicans who voted by absentee ballot in greater numbers in many cases than the Democrats. Now, look, I'm a healthy skeptic of voter integrity. That is a battle that is never won. It is a constant thing. In my book, The Divided Era, I talk at length about some voter fraud. There's amazing books out there about the voter fraud over the years. Voter fraud is as old as voting. And we've already seen that. You see Alabama and I believe Ohio already taking action to remove those here illegally from who are already on the voter rolls. We see in my view, an unconstitutional effort by many by federal agencies under the Biden administration for voter registration, which is just completely outrageous. I don't know why the Republicans haven't gotten an injunction yet. But at the end of the day, here's what we used to do. We back in the early 2000s, when I was chairman of the Contra Costa Republican Party, we knew who was on absentee ballot lists. We would contact them as soon as the ballots went out and remind them to get them in. Then we would check to see how many sent them in with about 10 days to go. And then we would call the people that didn't have them sent in and remind them to send them in. And then, because it wasn't updated as fast as it is today, what we would do is we would call them 3 days out and see whether they sent it in. And if they hadn't, we would tell them, at this point, you need to walk it in. Now, that's a form of ballot harvesting. The Democrats took it, as you know, steps much farther than that. But that means it was to degrees, not the concept altogether.
Yeah.
The current set of rules we're playing under require Republicans to vote early, not often, but to vote early and get it in there. Waiting for the last day gives results in things like what happened in Arizona, where in that particular county, the printing machine broke down, okay? You're inviting those kinds of things if you're not voting 1 and 2 days before or 3 days before. So I agree with you that 100% that we have to, Republicans, if they want to win, have to, and I'm Republican, have to get out there and stop being shy about voting early and then overwhelming them on election day and inviting these type of things. The other thing they need to do is be vigilant. Videos of drop boxes and the rest made a difference in the last election. Okay, we are wrapping up here for the first week. It was a great first week. I want to thank our special guest. I want to thank Steve Hook for hanging out with me and starting this process. I think it's gonna be cool. And Steve, where can they find us on the internet?
Well, they can find us on our YouTube page and also our Rumble page. We'll include that in the link. And again, I want to also thank Steve Hilton. What a wonderful guest, a great guest for our inaugural week. And oh, what fun we're going to have, Tom. Goodness, man. I mean, this is going to be this is going to be quite the same. I tell you, everybody talks about Kamala Harris. She's historical. She's historical. The whole thing is historical. You've got a Kennedy endorsing Donald Trump, for God's sakes. You've got the richest man in the world throwing his weight behind Donald Trump. And you've got the DNC completely just knocking the chessboard over and resetting the pieces with Kamala Harris in the role of the king this time around. It doesn't get much more historical than that, Tom, and I look forward to having some enlightened dissent with you as we get closer and closer to Election Day.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much once again, YouTube and Rumble. Please send the links along to your friends. We'll be here every Sunday night, all the way through election and beyond. And thanks so very much for joining us on our inaugural Enlightened Dissent, Del Beccaro and Hook's Enlightened Dissent. Thanks so much.
Goodbye.